Hello, everybody. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Soviet Russian Bear, and Joaquin Flores is back with me. He's had problems with his health, but now he's doing all right. He feels great. So, Joaquin, the subject of today's video is the 20th anniversary of 9/11, a terrorist attack, and the US in Afghanistan. So, 20 years ago, allegedly two airliners collided with the Twin Towers in New York City. So how do you remember this? How do you remember the media coverage in 2001?
Wow, wow. So I was like 23 years old when I was 23 when that happened.
Yeah.
And I had had
Mm-hmm.
past tense this beautiful Iranian girlfriend.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and her birthday was that day. And
Oh.
and we had just broken up, but I was like trying to get back with her and stuff. So I was like trying to put together like a birthday thing for her that
Mm-hmm.
day and see if I could like win her back kind of shit. It didn't happen, by the way. Very glad it didn't. She aged very badly and
Oh.
she's like my age. And, the,
Mm-hmm.
the thing for young men to do is to plan ahead and, you want to like marry younger. So, but I was very
Mm-hmm.
young at the time and she was about my age. And
Oh.
I remember the TV, I turned it on and
Mm-hmm.
it was like happening, right? It was like in the morning.
Yeah.
And uh, it had already, been in the news like that day. And it was like now the, you know, middle of the day or something. But I was in Los Angeles. So there's like a
Yeah.
whatever 4-hour difference or something. I don't remember, but some
Mm-hmm.
hours of difference, and it was fake. I remember seeing it and I'm like, this is like some Independence Day shit. I remember seeing it and being like, this is like CGI or something. I mean, because that's your reaction. Because I mean, I'm not saying it was CGI, but I'm not one of these, you know, it was, it was surreal. I mean, you couldn't believe it was happening. And uh, then after I
Mm-hmm.
was, sort of realizing, yeah, this was happening. My first thoughts was this was a false flag. I mean, because it's just like I was like, so you're fucking telling me that all along, like this whole time that we had the fucking
Mm-hmm.
arms race and all this shit, are you telling me all the fuck along that all that had to happen was a couple of dudes had to like fly a plane into, I don't know, a nuclear reactor or something and cause a meltdown? I mean, how many nuclear
Oh.
reactors are there? And I'm like, and then I was like, yeah. And wouldn't they have done something like that? Like, why would you do something symbolic like the World Trade Towers? Like, you think you would do some actual damage, like hit
Mm-hmm.
a nuclear facility and cause a meltdown? You can create like
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
Chernobyl. You can create 5 Chernobyls.
Yeah.
So think about that. And I'm like, this is something is very wrong. And then, I remember different interviewing different people and the hype right away. I remember it was like Rudy Giuliani, who I
Mm-hmm.
hated, at the time. I had a visceral, hatred for people like Giuliani at the time. As a, he's like a bootlicker and stuff like that. And I was very like, akab, and then I remember also Trump saying that it was a bomb. I remember
Mm-hmm.
Trump was interviewed about it and he said it was a bomb at the time.
Wow.
And I think that recording is still floating around out there. So,
Okay.
and then that same night, the president was Bush and he gave like a speech and he said whatever in his kind of fucking retarded way. He said his thing. And it was very clear that there was going to be a war, very clear that there was going to be a war. But then when the actions kind of rolled out to kind of jump ahead, I'm like, what does Iraq have to do with this? Afghanistan, I could understand but Iraq just seemed like, insane.
Yeah.
And that Iraq was working with these Wahhabis. I mean, it was even at the time. I mean, I was a young guy, but I knew some things. I already knew that there was like differences, and I knew that like Iraq was a secular state. I knew that they were having problems with like Sunni radicalism and Shia radicalism. Like they were fighting both. Actually, Iraq was, and that it was the Saudis that were actually behind a lot of the, and the Pakistanis were the ones that were like coordinating on this thing. So, and we knew also at that time, like these things are not new. I want people, I mean, I know a lot of your audience are even sometimes younger than you. And I want them to know that we knew 20 years ago, like when it happened, that it was an inside job, or, not who they said it was.
Oh, yeah.
And we knew already that it was like all the things that people talk about today, we knew back then. And I would say that, a person who probably pioneered a lot of the consistent public work on the who's who of it, of 9/11. Like, of course, you had like people who were maybe experts in engineering, and they're saying, oh, there's no way that this was not a controlled demolition. Like, that's all good. But the person I remember, a young man at the time, of course, very young, who really pioneered the connecting the dots of the, the parallel offices that were in Israel and Pentagon and stuff, was Ry Dawson. So, and people should always remember that Ry Dawson was doing a lot of the research and distribution of information. He worked very hard at educating the public about that. So, history should remember Ry Dawson.
Where did he go, by the way? YouTube terminated his channel?
I don't know. But maybe he has a Telegram or something. I believe so. Maybe I think actually he does. I think maybe if you look for ANC or ANC report on Telegram, maybe you would find that there. I would guess.
Okay.
So,
yeah. So Joaquin, what do you think about the alleged, oh no, that's the second question. So Joaquin, was Alex Jones around in 2001?
Yeah, he was around, but I'm not sure that the InfoWars had like, I'm not sure that InfoWars existed until like 2005 or something. Just trying to remember. 2004, I want to say, is like InfoWars. But Alex Jones was doing like kind of states' rights, and he was really involved in this concept of what sovereign citizen ideas, like I don't need to have a driver's license. Why? That's things like that. Back then, in the late 90s, going into that time. So yeah, he was around though. He was talking about things. I don't think he had InfoWars or Prison Planet up going in at the time.
Okay, and what do you think about the alleged Saudi Arabian involvement in these 9/11 attacks?
In terms of the people that were, actually involved, it's possible, I mean, what's very interesting is that a liberal left kind of guy, Michael Moore, that kind of obese guy, he's the one who did a movie about 9/11, which, it parroted a lot of the misinformation. It didn't say that was an inside job, but it did point out that it was Saudis that were involved, and not Afghans, not anyone that would have been like part of bin Laden's network, directly. We knew about that back then too. Yeah. but Michael Moore, actually, his movie came out, I don't know, 2004 or something. It was shortly, you know, a few years later, but not that many, 2003, something like that. And it was an okay movie. You know, people might check it out, but I think that when you really look at the Saudi, you know, involvement, is that you had a four-way kind of triangulation between the Pakistani ISI, right? And their assets in Afghanistan, and to the extent that they were involved in developing, you had the Saudis who had long time, you know, worked with the Pakistanis. They both have strong, you know, Wahhabi Salafism in this, you know, in their version of
Islam.
Sunnism. So, you know, it's look, I've done work with Pakistani television, and when talking about, you know, the Wahhabis in Syria, you can't say Wahhabis. They edit that out. You can say Daesh and you can say extremists, but you're not allowed to actually say Wahhabi as the problem, as being, you know, the Wahhabis that they are. Like, you can't actually say that in Pakistani media. So I kind of stopped. You know, I don't like when I can't say what I really think. So, yeah, dude, I would definitely, I would say that, look, there's a possibility that these planes were remote controlled. There's a possibility that there were not planes. There's so many fucking possibilities, but I think those are all besides the point. Like, unless your interest is a separate Aspergian autistic interest in the implementation of new technologies, like, is it blue beam? Is it fucking lasers and shit? Is it a whatever oxidizing magneto fucking ray? I don't know. But, you know, you see what I'm saying? Like, that's all superfluous. Like, the towers came down and that was used as a pretext to do the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, but Iraq and Afghanistan were not involved, you see, and it was like an inside job that it looks like that the Israeli intelligence Mossad was, I don't know if I can say that, but that they were, you know, involved as well. So, and it was actually, again, it was Rai who opened people's eyes to the involvement of Mossad. See, people were clear that it was an inside job and a false flag at the time, but the connections to Israel were not really known, you know, until his research came out. So.
Okay, so Joaquin, before we go to the war in Afghanistan, I'd like to say something that a lot of people, especially on the Russophobic spectrum, of the Russophobic side of the spectrum, say they draw parallels between the 9/11 attacks and Russia's and the apartment building bombings in Russia at the end of the 90s. So
that justified the Chechen conflict, or?
Yeah, that's what they say, that those apartment bombings were actually like staged by the FSB and by Putin personally in order to justify the war on Chechen separatists. And the thing about it is that when the Chechen war was like the first Chechen war, when Yeltsin was in power, the Western media actually called them terrorists, and they support, because Yeltsin was like, Russia under Yeltsin was like so pro-Western. The first Chechen war, actually the Western media supported Yeltsin and the Russian troops, and they called Chechen separatists, Chechen terrorists. But when Putin came to power and started the second Chechen war started, they actually said that, oh, Putin is an aggressor and he like attacking, and the Chechen terrorists suddenly became Chechen freedom fighters, and Putin, you see, my friend.
I remember that. Yeah, that was 99.
Yeah, 99, yeah. And then they said that Russia's like apartment bombings were staged by, you know, this theory is still very popular among the pro-Western Russian pro-Western Russian like fifth column. It is.
I mean, but what's the thinking? I mean, like, can't you support like Russian regional hegemony for realist reasons, and also say that, yeah, they, they picked the right time that they wanted to go to war with Chechnya for the second conflict. And yeah, it was a false flag, but the conflict was justified. I mean, can't both of those things be true at the same time? You see, people are fucking idealists. And here's the fucking problem, Yuri. They're fucking idealists, and they think the good guys use purity of arms and the bad guys use all the nasty tricks. And that's not how fucking reality works. Like, nobody should think that reality works that way. Good and bad are questions for God to resolve. But what the truth is that all sides use all the tricks in the book. So if you support the outcome of the Second Chechen War, which I think was pretty good as a result.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? But if the FSB planted the bombs in the apartment and it was a false flag, like, what is that? Because innocent people died in the apartments? Is that the thinking? Yeah, but the thing is that when you're always constantly evaluating what's going to be the greatest loss. For example, if Chechnya had broken apart, and then what next? Like the rest. See, you creep it into the next oblast.
Yeah.
That's how these things happen. It's called Focoism. It's wars of attrition, liberated zones, like guerrilla warfare. So it's like, okay, so Chechnya, then what? Right? Then more.
Afghanistan, yeah.
You see, so how many people would have died under those conditions?
Yeah.
So I'm not justifying this. These aren't decisions that I make. I think everything is lamentable. But, you can't disagree with the outcomes. I just don't think that it's beyond the FSB to do such a thing. I know that there are GRU and FSB operations that work with Ukrainian Nazis to trick them into this, but they might even arm some of them, to build the trust and to get them, like a sting operation. Like, what's the ethics and morality of a sting operation? Like, if you're a cop doing undercover stuff and you're involved in selling drugs to kids, and kids overdose and die in the streets, like, you're a cop who's killed kids overdosing them. But the point is to take down the ring. You save a lot more lives, you see. So there's, there's ethical, moral questions, Yuri, about that Chechen conflict. But yeah, I don't think it matters.
Yeah, look, dude, and as a person who lives in such a city where a failed apartment bomb, in fact, that house where the so-called sugar was founded, it's actually like a couple of blocks away from my house. And what can I say is that most people actually didn't believe it was they believed it was like Chechen terrorists and not the FSB.
Yeah, but if you read now, the Washington Post or Atlanticist, liberal Western media, they promote the theory very heavily that it was a false flag.
Well, the same thing does our pro-Western fifth column in Russia, like Echo of Moscow radio station and freaking, I don't know. Yeah, dude, that's just, I don't know. Okay, so let's get to the US war in Afghanistan. So we have already established that the 9/11 attacks were just a pretext for the US to invade Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, that's correct.
So I remember the news, like George Bush saying that like Taliban is covering Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and I remember those footage from the US aircraft carrier jets taking off, bombing Afghanistan. I remember that the Tora Bora bomb, which was like the biggest like unconventional, conventional, I mean, non-nuclear bomb ever detonated. Like, don't you remember this? Tora Bora.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah. and the United States was there 20 years, and the Soviet Union was only 10 years. Well, Afghanistan is called the graveyard of empires for a reason, man.
Right.
But the thing is, why did the pro-US supported army, why did it fail so easily? I mean, the pro-Soviet regime, the Najibullah regime,
Right.
it lasted at least for 2 years after the Soviets left, and then the Yeltsin government, they just cut all the support to the Najibullah regime, and Najibullah was executed like in Kabul. He was like hanged in Kabul. So why pro-Soviet regime lasted for 2 years and the pro-US regime fell in a couple of weeks? And dude, those footages from the airport, people were falling off planes that's from such a height.
Yeah, no, we saw, everybody saw.
Yeah.
Look,
Yeah.
it's I understand how you're framing the question.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think about it in those terms, mind you, but I do understand the framing. I'll try to be, keep fidelity to your frame of reference here.
Yeah.
One thing that people should know is that the everything that the Americans know about Afghanistan is inherited from the British Foreign Intelligence Services. Okay. And their knowledge was not up to par. Russian information on Afghanistan as a country bordering the Soviet Union at the time was very, very good. What people have to remember is that the spread of Soviet style society, even though there was like initially Bolshevik Revolution, and then of course it spreads into the Balkans and Central Europe as a consequence of the anti-fascist war, the Great Patriotic War. But what people don't always know in some of these other cases is that you actually have, like in Afghanistan, you actually had a monarchy. You had a monarchy that because of diplomacy and education and cultural exchange, like, come to Moscow, and see what we're doing. And the monarchy in Afghanistan was stable. And even though the monarchy was based in Kabul, it was had organic ties to the different tribes in the mountains, all these, hundreds of tribes that made up the Taliban. So in essence, you see the Afghanistan, if you could make a comparison to Libya, okay, like actually is a bunch of tribes, and the idea of like a modern state with, armies that have uniforms and government offices and stuff like that is kind of like a facade that kind of conceals the real tribal nature of that society. And so the Russians or the Soviets really had a lot of credibility with the monarchy. So the monarchy actually established the system, and then it was the children, it was the princes of the Afghan monarchy that supported this idea. And they brought in a like parliamentary, system that had elections and stuff. And those elections resulted in a pro-Soviet government. But it was planned and staged. It was orchestrated by the monarchy that was kind of controlling, this Congress, you see. And so you had, it was about trying what the Americans, and through the Pakistani ISI, talking about in the 70s, 80s, successfully built up divisions within the tribes. Okay, they successfully built up these divisions within the tribes that, if people really look at the ethnicities, it's really the North that has Tajik ethnicity, which became the Northern Alliance. But with some exception, like people are effectively Sarbaz, Pashtun, you see,
Mm-hmm.
and they're Farsi speaking, a type of local Farsi.
Yeah.
So that
And
was the only real kind of organic kind of indigenous division. And that, but that was not the division that was used. It was, but that was not the only division that was used, and for those reasons, the Soviet occupation or interference or involvement with Afghanistan involved more layers of tribal support that had kind of come up organically with the monarchy, which the monarchy itself had these, inroads and stuff like through marriages and, money and parties and agreements and diplomacy. It's Afghanistan is only a country really because countries surround it. You see, so it's that's what defines Afghanistan is these more stable countries that surround it, and that kind of created the borders. And but now to challenge the as I said, the framing.
Yeah.
I don't think that I think that you can look at the Soviets were tied. They were embedded into the outcome of the Soviet Union. Does that make sense? Whereas Western elites are transnational. They're mercantile and transnational, and they're not really tied to the success of any particular country or entity. I mean, they can get behind one, and then they kind of almost like have I want to say, parasitic relationship with host country. These globalist bankers, these globalist plutocracy, and even though they originate in Western societies, they could embed themselves, anywhere that was going to, like, they might try to embed themselves in China next, or who knows, you see, right? So I think it's a very different story. I don't think this is a case of the Soviets, it took 10 years to eject them, but it took only whatever. It's you could make the opposite argument that the Soviet occupation lasted a shorter time, that the Americans successfully were there for 20 years and the Soviets were kicked out in 10. So you could flip that around, you see. But, honestly, the Americans were the globalists that used the American army in Afghanistan. This is like a transfer of wealth scheme, like how to get money from the public, from the tax base into private hands. So it's kind of like money laundering. You have the military industrial complex. You have like black budget. So, you have all these $90 toilet seats and, $65 screws for everything going on, $75 hamburgers for everything going on in Afghanistan. You don't have to fucking win. If your point is to make money, see, if your point is to like guarantee the success of some sovereign geopolitical entity, then you're all in. Like in that way, like you have to win militarily. But if the point is to make money, like you can make money falling down, like you can make money losing, and then you just take your money and go somewhere else and buy your way into that society, you see. So I think it's like really fucking apples and oranges, dude. I don't think that these are like that comparable, because the Soviet goals in Afghanistan were identical to the publicly proclaimed Soviet goals in Afghanistan, but the American goals in Afghanistan, there's like three different layers of goals that are not that related. There's like what the public thinks, there's like what the pseudo elites think, and then there's like what's really going on. And I would say, I would actually make this analogy. Have you seen the movie The Producers, or the Producers? Is like
The Producers.
The Producers, that's a comedy from like the 60s or 70s. It basically shows how Hollywood accounting works, which is also kind of like how military accounting works. See, you make money by losing money, because it's not your money that you're losing. You see,
Yeah.
if you give me money to spend on something and I claim I spent it on that, but it didn't cost that much, or I lost it or got killed or fucking destroyed or whatever, then I actually just kept the money and just said that we lost it. You see?
Yeah.
So
Okay. So
does that make sense? Like, is that, you understand that? Like,
yeah, I do. I do. So Joaquin, what do you think? Because as I said off camera, the Russian patriotic community, should I say, they are now divided into two camps, 2 points of view. The first one thinks that, yeah, the US was actually it was a like shameful, humiliating defeat of the United States in Afghanistan. That's why they are running like. That's why they are just they abandoned their like allied pro-US army, and they're running like they're running scared. And the second camp said, no, the US weren't actually defeated. It was actually a change of plan. They left all these weapons to Taliban so that Taliban will expand its influence in the post-Soviet like Central Asian countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan. So to like create more of a controlled chaos to give Russia more headache, should I put it like
so
that?
tell us again, what are the two different viewpoints, like more succinctly?
Okay. The first viewpoint is that the US was actually that was actually a humiliating defeat for the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why they drop everything and just left. And the second camp is, no, the US is just changing tactics. And the US actually intentionally dropped all the weaponry and left it to the Taliban, so the Taliban can use that weaponry to expand their influence, their faith onto the post-Soviet Central Asian countries like Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Kyrgyzstan, and even
Okay.
Kazakhstan.
So one of them is that it was just a humiliating defeat,
Yeah,
handed to the United States. And
yeah.
the second one is that it's actually not a retreat, but a reconfiguration of resources to kind of move into Tajikistan or to.
Yeah.
Okay, I understand. Well, I would say that both of those competing views are wrong. It's neither one of those. It was never believed by the real. We're talking about the Joint Chiefs of Staff as being like a mafia. They are private stock owners of these companies. They own lots of shares of these companies. You see, it's a different logic when individualism and personal profit, okay, are the goals. And then you're just using some country's resources and their military to accomplish those goals. That army can lose, it can win, it doesn't fucking matter. You're making the money either way. That was one of the goals. Secondly, simply by having the conflict there for that 20 years, which is a long fucking time, it held back countries in the region from making deals with Afghanistan, whether you're talking about Iran, about China, about Russia, with things like, it's a very mineral rich country, people ought to know. I mean, besides lithium, they have a lot of different ores and stuff. Lithium is one of these. Opium, global opium trade was a huge factor, like to see, but this is all about controlled demolitions. So I think the theme, Yuri, from 9/11 to, where empires go to die is all planned demolition. This is a planned demolition of an empire, not because they want to end the empire, but because the empire is going to end anyway for reasons relating to the decline of the replacement of the petrodollar as the world's global reserve currency. In fact, generally speaking, the yuan has already replaced a lot of the dollar, more than not already. It just so happens that the yuan is tied to the dollar, and then China is the first or second place holder of UST bonds. So they're connected in that way. But the only thing really propping up the dollar right now in terms of its use globally is the derivatives market. And that the use in the derivatives market is really just a matter of habit. There's no regulation. There's no real conferred advantage except for having your method of payment system set up, you know, and have it to use the dollar in derivatives markets. Okay. That's really what's going on here. This is not about the effectiveness of a certain tank or the ineffectiveness of a certain military strategy. This is the producers. Okay. This is like, how do you make money while losing? Because it was already understood the American empire was going to collapse. It was already known it was going to collapse. Why? Because we know from reading the white papers and the different analyses from the Project on the New American Century, which was the think tank that was primarily pushing this occupation of Afghanistan, PNAC, okay, the so-called neocons, right? And they already knew that the collapse of the Soviet Union at the beginning of the 90s, that 10-year period, even though Russia had Yeltsin, and even though they got, and even though in 99 they quickly pulled in like Poland and a few countries into NATO, like in response to Putin, the 90s were a failure of like there was no successful military expansion or destruction of the former Soviet Union after the initial thing. Like they kind of like cracked it, but they actually failed to dismantle Russia. And they failed to take advantage. This is what PNAC said. And I think it's probably true that the Americans were not able to truly take advantage of this unipolar historical moment. Let's say, for shits and giggles, for simplicity, let's say from 1990 to 2005. Let's just say like this, or maybe even 2000, that this decade and a half was the New World Order. That was the New World Order, and it failed. So this is confusing for people who think the New World Order is coming. The New World Order failed. And PNAC was like, how can we do a con on Congress, on the public, using the media, like that we are that we're going to do this to win. But really it was like, how do we siphon off as much money? Like, how do we fleece the American people? Because like governments don't produce wealth, like people produce wealth. Governments tax, right? So governments might create money, but people create wealth. Okay. So you understand the difference there. So they were fleecing the American people because they could see that the ability to fleece other countries was going to go down. And like what we're seeing right now with the Great Reset is a continuation. I mean, austerity in the United States, which is really done through the Federal Reserve, through the manipulation of interest rates, very different from Europe, where it's done, in legislation, is critical. And the lockdowns and shutdowns from, coronavirus is continuing the same process. It's identical to what happened in Afghanistan, you see. Is this like, I understand this is a different take, but I really think this is the way to think about it. So no, the United States is not improving or increasing their position in Tajikistan or Turkmenistan or anywhere else. They're not in the position to reconnoiter or whatever their fucking position in Central Asia. That's ridiculously stupid to say. And
but I'm sorry for interrupting you, but the thing is that second position of the second camp of the Russian patriotic community is that not exactly the expansion of influence, but the U.S. as they put it, they believe that the U.S. goal is through Taliban is to destabilize Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan by the controlled chaos, by the use of Taliban to destabilize the countries in order to create more headache for Russia. That's what.
Yeah. No, I think that they are trying to create. Their aim was to encourage China to increase its influence in. I mean, Russian Chinese relations are very strong.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'm saying what the Americans think or trying to do, like what Trump was trying to do, what the Americans. This is policy, not just Trump. Okay, so the thinking here is to create a crisis not through terrorism, but through Chinese influence growing in former Soviet Central Asia. It already is, and culturally is like Yuri. Institutions and architecture are super important. So when you look at Turkmenistan or Tajikistan, Uzbekistan in the 70s and 80s, all the architecture was Soviet brutalism, like futurism. But now if you look at the new architecture, it looks like Dubai. So why in the Islam, well, it looks like a cross between Dubai and Shanghai. Okay, with like the green glass and the green buildings and shit with little bubbles and all that stuff looking, the style that you see, right?
Yeah.
That has a profound influence on people's thinking because they identify with people differently based upon that. Okay, that influences culture and the direction of a society, architecture much more than a lot of other factors that people might think. So no, I would say, in my opinion, that the United States, as a military, militarily, does not have a capacity to project power in Central Asia, militarily. Financially, insofar as dollars buy things and you can bribe people, for some more time, maybe 20 more years or something, but maybe less, maybe 5, maybe there won't be money then. I mean, we have a great reset going on, so I don't know. I think 20 years is like too far to say, but United States is not that relevant any longer in Central Asia and Middle East. They're just not. That time has passed. Now, this may seem surprising to people, Americans, who might still think that, okay, no, this is a ghost of the past. This is a cultural legacy. Let me tell you, if you spent a lot of time consuming BBC and English British media, okay, they talk about their, I mean, no offense, but insignificant island in northwestern Europe, and they talk about like when Boris Johnson meets with some foreign leader, the media reports it to like English people like this is a very important meeting and people really think that whatever England wants is like what's going to happen. Like they still think that they kind of have, they still act like, they still think that like it's a relevant power. Like they think that countries in the world are concerned that that Britain might attack them militarily or that sanctions or that that the UK might impose are going to somehow affect them economically. It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous.
It's ridiculous. But if you lived in England, you would think that England was still a relevant global player because that's the the ideology of that society. And likewise, we're right upon that precipice with United States, not in Latin America, not in its own a region of influence hegemonically, but in Central Asia and the Middle East. No, caput, finito.
Okay, so Joaquin, if I understood you correctly, that the United States will, I mean, not will, it is already losing most of its influence in the world. Like it's not going to be a world hegemon it used to be. Is that correct?
Yes. United States is in a very weak position because there is a lack of cohesion and national vision among the elites, because some elites are nationally based and some have American passports,
Globalists.
but they're globalists. So the idea right now is to shore up American, reorganize the military, reorganize the economy, weaken the dollar so that imports are too expensive for Americans to buy, to change balance of trade. They know they're not going to ever be able to, they know that any country that tries to cash in like T-bills, the treasury bonds in high volumes is never going to happen. Like, you're not going to be able to sell these. That whole system was about tying the world together a certain way transactionally through the process of production, reproduction, and the production and distribution of goods and services through international supply lines. The selling of treasury bonds and the American debt is a fiction. Like, it's a fiction. The US debt is a fiction. Like, America's not in debt. Like, on paper they are, but it's like this. If I lend you, $10,000, I'm a millionaire, right? Let's say I have $10 million and I lend you $10,000 or $100,000, like, you owe me and I own you. Okay. But if I have $10 million and I lend you $10 million, like, you own me. Like, I lent it to you, but now I can't buy something to get it back from you. I can't get it back from you.
Yeah.
United States is not in debt. They created a fiction, which, leaders of countries like Japan and China knew this, but it's how it was sold. It was how it was conceptualized, and how from the positions of leadership, this was disseminated into the public, because economics doesn't make sense to people intentionally. Okay. Because the origin of value is discrete. It's the origin of money, and the purpose, how economies work, is actually, withheld from people. So people have a lot of stupid ideas about how the world works consequently.
Yeah.
And there's all the signs point to the United States, that they're like practically dismantling the Marine Corps. They're completely downsizing the Marine Corps. So and when you think about the Marine Corps, that was very big in these wars. And they're reducing the Marine Corps, and what they're trying to do is say, like, look, China, you can have the lithium in Afghanistan, but you have to take your 5G and your lithium. You have to take 5G out of Brazil. You have to take 5G out of Latin America, and you have to let us have the lithium in Bolivia. Like, they tried to get it and then they lost it. There's a whole thing, different story with Elon Musk fucked up. They did a whole they killed people. They overthrew the government in Bolivia recently. And then, like, the next election, they lost. They lost, and the same government that they overthrew came back in. So they can't get from Bolivia unless they can get an agreement. So critical here now is the European Union, because European Union is tied in with China, but European Union is tied in with the United States via transatlanticism. So, when China does things in Latin America, it is very much connected to the European Union. Okay, like a lot of people think like 21st century socialism, like the Bolivarian, revolution in Venezuela, and they think that this is somehow like not connected to transatlantic centers of capital, but it is. It's just the European side. But the European side has a more direct tie with China than the American side of this transatlantic thing. Okay, so if what has happened, so people can understand the world that they live in, transatlanticism is this. The United States has profited through the banks, through the expansion of the EU, more than Germany has. The American banks have, the American companies and American banks have profited in Poland, have profited in Bulgaria, in Romania. They've profited more than Germany has, which you think the EU, you think, you know, the Fourth Reich, you think Germany, France.
No, it's the United States.
But actually, the United States made more money, or, you know, relative to its buy-in, it was more money. So, but in Latin America, where you even have like insurgent guerrilla movements that are overthrowing pro-American governments, like in Colombia, you know, with the FARC or something like this, just, you know, we're talking through the 70s, 80s, 90s. Okay. What Bolivarianism was about connecting to the Spanish banks that are proxies of German banking. So the European side of transatlanticism, it's been European finance capital that has supported a lot of the so-called socialism in Latin America. Okay. But the American project right now is to swap influence, to disentangle globalism, because China's involved in globalism too. I mean, China's involved in they have, you know, transatlantic companies, they invest, you have, you know, Huawei, you have a lot of these. So the idea is to pull China out of Latin America, to reintroduce a Monroe Doctrine, and the US is pulling out of Central Asia.
Yeah.
So it's a like how they have like prisoner swaps or territory swaps. That's what's going on, like broadly, so people understand.
Okay. Okay. So, what do you think will happen with drug traffic from opium traffic, exactly from Afghanistan into Russia and in Europe?
It's a very good question.
Yeah.
And we had an opium crisis, you know, during this time of the of the occupation of Afghanistan. It's fascinating that a major multi-billion-dollar lawsuit just settled, and that a lot of these doctors and hospitals are no longer prescribing opium. So they have synthetics, of course, too, and there's other places that it's grown. And people have argued that the Western Hemisphere markets are not connected to Afghanistan. That's not true, because it's a global market trade, even in terms of influence on price and supply, global supply. Even if the origin is not the same, the lack of supply here is going to cause an increase in cost anywhere else, even if that's not the supply line, because new supply lines will develop to meet the needs of junkies, of addicts. But now you have more addicts, you know, with fewer supply globally. So the price will go up for heroin globally now, if the Taliban is you know, not going to grow the opium. So I believe that they probably won't, you know, be doing the opium, but maybe they will. I don't know, but they weren't really doing it before too much. I mean, small amounts. People need to know that it was like these giant, like whatever, American transport planes were taking off from Kabul airport like every hour, loaded with opium. Like people think it's like some donkeys or like, or some soldiers like doing things on the side, or it's like some corrupt captains from in the army or some shit. Like, no. Like you have to think volume scale, economies of scale. Like for the global opium trade and how much was produced in Afghanistan, like it was officially the American army, because it had to be the military bases, and it had to be like airplane, like 747, 777, C-180 size plane, after like every hour, on the hour leaving from Afghanistan, loaded with opium, you see? So people don't understand the volume. People have a hard time, like, you know, visualizing $1 billion. People have a hard time visualizing, you know, numbers when and of such scale. So I have to say that opium's going to get more expensive, but that's,
Yeah, well, if you imagine $1 billion in $100 bills, so what is it, like a train car of $100 bills, or maybe no, maybe several cars of $100 bills, or maybe an entire train.
Yeah, when people visualize money,
Hmm.
people think, like, for example, $1 billion is 1,000 million. It's 1 million
Yeah,
times 1,000.
yeah.
Like
So
that
how
people actually
many?
can't. I mean, on the higher, distribution of, the bell curve on IQ, you can visualize those things. You probably can visualize the difference, but the average IQ is 100, dude.
Yeah.
Which maybe is a good argument for eugenics by itself, but I didn't say that. But the thing is that when you really think about it, like, there's no way that that you can have an industry of heroin from Afghanistan without like 24/7 supply line that's
Mhm.
like with security and airports and like workers that like with like fucking forklifts and shit like all day long. Like, it's a job, it's an industry. It wasn't just like farmers growing it and some people smuggle it out of the country and now millions and millions of people are getting high every day. Like, that's not how it
Mhm.
fucking works, bro. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, opium will get more expensive. I can't speak to like the particular deals,
Mhm.
and there's so much lack of knowledge and information, especially people who only became politicized in the past 5 years, and then they think that what
Yeah.
happened in Afghanistan, that's like, oh, something was happening. They weren't even paying attention to Afghanistan. They didn't even know
Mhm.
about Afghanistan, and they might think that Trump was doing this and that Trump would have won, but that Biden lost, or that Biden pulled out, but that Trump would have stayed. And they don't understand how beautiful. There's like a whole other section. I'm not going to even
Yeah.
go. If you want to ask, you can, but it's,
It's a different, like, it's straying away from our subject.
it actually is the subject, but it's about what actually happened with Afghanistan. Like, because you asked, like, why all of a sudden did a 80,000 Taliban force, like,
Yeah.
liquefy 300,000
Yeah.
U.S. trained, U.S. armed soldiers, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Biden said that no, there is not going to be a Taliban takeover because there are only 80,000 Taliban and 300,000 pro-US Afghan army. But
Yeah,
it turns
that's
out,
like a retarded way of understanding the world. Like,
yeah.
that's like saying that the Cuban Revolution couldn't have happened because only like 70 guys got off the boat at the Granma,
Hmm.
and it was against the whole Cuban army. So how do right? That's not how it works, though. It's about
Yeah.
local support, supply lines,
Hmm.
and where people's heads were really at. I mean, like, you have a lot of people in the Afghan army that like are sympathetic to like
Taliban.
Taliban. I mean, they're in the army because it's a job that paid, $150 a month. That's why they were in the
Well,
army.
and you've heard obviously about the Afghan province named Panjshir. So the Panjshir lion you probably heard about.
Yeah.
So his son, the son of the original Panjshir lion who fought against the Soviets,
Mm.
they are actually now they have a resistance movement towards, and they are fighting Taliban right now.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, like we said, there are some different family and tribal
Mhm.
divisions, but by and large, the only real significant division is um, the Northern Alliance,
Alliance.
and they were uh, against the Emirate. They were for a they were for, what was it called? Was it Islamic Republic of Afghanistan?
Islamic Republic.
Yeah, I think it was Islamic Republic or Islamic State of Afghanistan. It was Islamic State of Afghanistan, the Northern Alliance supported. But it's, you know, like people who think its ideology would be wrong. Yeah, you could have ideological differences and stuff, because you can put them on paper and you can memorize them and then it becomes an ideology. But the real differences were the linguistic and ethnic, familial, tribal. And, you know, but like, this is part of Afghanistan for forever. You know, this makeup of composition. It doesn't lead to disintegration or conflicts in Afghanistan unless you have, you know, foreign meddling to play these divide and conquer games. But people would educate themselves to know that this is happening on the tribal level. It's not about extremism. It's not secularism versus fundamentalism or anything like that. It's not about we like America or we don't like America. But what people should remember from last year, a year ago, or, you know, a year and a half ago, summer of 2020, Russia was going to host Taliban meeting. They were having high-level talks with Taliban leaders. And so was the Trump administration. They were actually, it looked like either United States and Russia were competing to make a good deal with Taliban. Like United States, when it was Trump, were competing to make a good deal with Taliban, or they were working together. Like there's different ways of looking at that. There's both happening at the same time, of course, in reality, but you know, if you're going to make it either or. And what can you say?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, it was already set up. Like I would almost suggest that the withdrawal of the U.S. forces from Afghanistan was already a plan, because we knew it was, from the Trump administration. Okay. But they were doing it very finessed in a way to exit with the best possible deal and, you know, with the least losses, like, right? But what happened with the Biden administration, in my view, the Biden administration actually had no control over the date of the military withdrawal. That even though there's divisions and even arguably betrayals that occurred at the level of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the JCS, in the Pentagon, in Washington, over the direction to go in Afghanistan, that roughly speaking, the withdrawal period time that we just had was actually created by the Trump administration. Okay, but there's this resistance that the civilian and the contractors and all of these supply lines and all of the assets and people that are there were not under the control. We're not. Does that make sense? So now Biden administration actually, what would they actually would have done had they been able to control the events of the military? See, I don't think that Biden is in control of the military, not because he's senile, but I mean, even the guy who, you know, talks in his earpiece is not in control of the military. The military is doing something else right now. I'm not 100% clear. But look, why wouldn't they just have deployed, created some fiasco, created some pretext, maybe another fucking Islamic false flag, whatever, dude, and then send 50,000 troops to Afghanistan? They could have done that.
Yeah, and
Why
that was
didn't
actually
they?
yeah, and that was actually my next question is couldn't they like organize some sort of false flag and under that pretext like send troops to Afghanistan again?
Exactly. So yes, they could have
Yeah,
organized the false flag, but I don't
yeah.
think the military is on board with remaining in Afghanistan. I think that's actually what occurred. And I'm not idealistic
Mhm.
about this. I'm not saying these are patriots and
Mhm.
it's not okay. Like it could be all about the stock valuation of these different military industrial complex firms. I haven't looked at, at where those
Mhm.
companies stand. Not all of them are publicly traded anyhow, but I'm just, surmising. And clearly they could
Mhm.
have, clearly if the Biden administration controlled the number, had control over the number of US forces in Afghanistan, they could have added a lot more. They could have done a false flag and added a bunch more. And
Mhm.
remember that it was Trump that was drawing down the numbers and was fighting with the JCS. He was fighting with Milley. He was fighting with
Mhm.
them to draw down the numbers. And they kind of compromised. I mean, it was in the thousands. It was like way less than 5,000. It was like 3,500, 2,500. They were going back and forth. Could we half that? Could we get that down to 900? 800, I think, was a number at some point. 800, 900 was a number at some point to aim for. Um, and what appeared to happen is that the Biden administration was haggling, was arguing, was pushing until the very end to keep to add troops, to keep the occupation, to keep the system, to keep the shakedown going, uh, for whatever reason, or 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 they didn't have control over the process at all. But clearly, they didn't have control over the military, and I would say that that's the biggest clue that Biden administration is not really in control of foreign policy. So, yes.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is going to be like last question, and we are going to wrap this up. All right. It's clear to me that Russia has no plans in returning to Afghanistan.
Mm,
We don't want to step on the same rake again.
mm, mm, mm,
You
mm,
see,
mm.
this is a Russian proverb. Maybe it's not just Russian. Is to step on the same rake twice.
Is
So
that like
Russia
when you
is
step on the rake and then the pole like hits you in the
yeah,
face or
yeah, yeah,
something? Oh, okay.
yeah.
We have that in Looney Tunes. So we have like Tom and Jerry, we
Uh-huh.
have that.
So
Roadrunner. Yeah, we have that.
yeah. So Russia is not going to do that. But there are some people who say that China could actually step in and to invade Afghanistan. So what are your thoughts on that? What's your take?
Mm. I think we live increasingly in an age of soft power.
Yeah.
Uh, there's still role for military conflicts, but I don't think China needs to do that. It's like this whole concept that by expanding territorially, that you're expanding your power was irrelevant, was indeed a relevant way of understanding power and power projection, great power conflicts through the 20th century. But I don't think that it's moving forward, and even now in the 21st century, in the first few decades now in the 20s, as much of a factor. Like the pinnacle of land being everything was feudalism, and you know through the period of capitalism after feudalism, okay, and as we go
Yeah.
into the next stage of this technocracy or whatever, there's going to be a fight over the future, but there always is, but in the post financial order that the present plutocracy is trying to manage into themselves into a technocracy which can still control a post-capitalist order.
Mm-hmm.
Another component of that is that territoriality decreases in significance because technologies to synthetically produce the raw materials. Okay, so if robots make things, then you don't need like cheap labor supplies. You don't need third world labor. And if robots are making things, then they're actually not profitable to sell. They have only a use value. They have no exchange value. Okay, like when people talk about the dual nature of commodities having a utility, like you can eat it, or you can wipe your ass with it, or you can sell it, right? So if you only can use that thing, then there's no reason to have a war to open a country's markets for your goods, because they're not profitable to be sold if robots are making them. And if robots are making them, you don't need their labor to produce the thing either. So there's classical colonialism, and then there's classical imperialism. And in one iteration, you have a cheap labor force producing goods that are sold back to the first world country as finished commodities. And in the other model, you have maybe the commodities are produced through a global supply chain, value added from different, but maybe even in the first world countries. And then you're opening up markets in these so-called emerging markets for new customers. We're moving beyond that era. And then when you think about things like what are the raw materials that you need to produce certain commodities, those can be synthesized. Okay, so as you move away, so most things can be synthesized, but the question is how many joules or how much energy, that you can calculate into a universal, like a kilowatt or a joule or something, does it take, right, to synthetically produce lithium? Okay, but if your energy production becomes cheaper, then it becomes cheaper. It becomes much less expensive to just synthetically produce everything. So what I'm saying is that, like, kind of like the first country that finishes this process, like you could be Hawaii and rule the world. You see, you could be a tiny little island that's has 10 human beings and everything robots, and you could rule the whole fucking world, or just outproduce the world if you have robots. So we're very, very close to this. So there's no, like, everything right now is like, how do you shake as much fruit down off the tree, and how much can you line your pockets, and then how can you use that money and then exchange that money for power, the type of power that will exist in a post-monetary system. That's really what's going on right now. So there's no fucking reason that China needs to go into Afghanistan, because first of all, they might get lithium for batteries, but pretty soon, like before you're able to grow a beard, Yudi, like China will be synthesizing lithium, like probably by 5 years from now. So why would you do that? And China is really going to have a growing middle class, growing. And China doesn't need the United States or Europe as export markets if it is going to have to increase its productive capacity to meet the demand needs of both a Chinese middle class and a European and American and African middle class. Like, no. That why you don't need to produce and sell commodities if they're not profitable. Like, the only point of producing and selling commodities is to increase the capital accumulation, but you don't have capital accumulation in a post-capital order, which is technocracy. So these are the questions that people who are interested in the subject should be thinking about. They should never be thinking about, they should never have the stupid idea that territoriality and natural resources are, an atemporal, like forever type of thing. We are coming to the end of that whole reality. It's actually a reality that has predominated for millennia. In fact, it's almost like a complete rupture with the past that we're, with the past altogether, that we're right on the precipice of. that's how I
Okay.
would conclude my thoughts on that.
Yeah. Okay, I think this is it. We should wrap this up. It's
Go
been
ahead.
already like a long time. Yeah. It was a great pleasure having you back on my
Thank
channel.
you for having me.
Yeah.
Here I am
Okay,
in
Joaquin.
Afghanistan in the cave
Yeah.
with my homie Bin Laden, and we're signing off.
Signing off. Yeah. Bye bye, dude.
All right, cheers.
Cheers.